So our next presenter, I believe, is going to be the last presenter in this room for the day. At least that's what it looks like on the calendar. So Josh Long, who's sitting right here in front of me, is a security researcher and writer who happens to also be the chief security analyst at Intego. Josh is here to talk with us about security issues today, so please give him a warm welcome and welcome him on stage.
Level's good? Volume's good? Okay, cool. All right. So this session is titled Hacking Your Own Thinking, Developing a Security Mindset. So you can kind of imagine what it is that we're going to be discussing today. And this is all about helping you to think different about security and to help you to help others think different as well. Okay, so developing a security mindset. This is just a real brief overview of what we're going to cover. Security is part of really everything. It's everybody's problem. It's not just an IT person's problem. And we're going to talk about how to retrain your brain. Okay, there's a certain way of thinking that a security-minded individual has that's different from probably how most people look at the world. And so we're going to examine that a little bit and talk about how you can kind of retrain your mind to think more like a certain type of person who might think about security more. And also we're going to have a little bit of fun too. We're going to practice. So everybody in the room gets to be involved in this game. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get there. And we'll also talk about how to train others. Because sure, it's great that you're here. I appreciate it. But you're probably also going to want to bring this back to other people, whether at your organization or maybe even at home. These are principles that really can apply to anybody. And these are wrapping your mind around how to think this way is something that can benefit really everybody in the world. So I do want you to be thinking about how you can also help teach others these principles once you are applying them to your own life. All right. And then finally, we'll go over quickly go over some resources. They will, of course, be in the slides, which everyone will get. Okay, so security pervades everything. Breaches happen all the time. We're always hearing about it. We hear, everybody in this room has heard about Target, about Equifax. You've heard about countless hospitals being compromised recently with ransomware. School districts are compromised. Government agencies, police departments, law enforcement. All of these entities are susceptible to all kinds of different attacks. Data breaches, password dumps, these things happen all the time. And what we hear about on the news is really only scratching the surface. Organizations big and small are breached every single day. Just as a rough guess, I would suggest that probably for every one that we hear about on the news, there are hundreds of other organizations that are getting breached. So this is kind of a big deal, this whole security thing, which is why you guys are in this room listening to talks about security. But one thing that doesn't really get covered as much on the news is personal accounts get compromised. People's identities get stolen every single day. And one thing that we don't necessarily hear about with regard to either of these, whether it's businesses or whether it's individual accounts getting compromised, we don't usually hear details about how these attacks began. But in most cases, attacks are facilitated by at least one person's human error, right? And more specifically, it's the victim's lack of thinking like an attacker, anticipating attack scenarios, acting in accordance with that mindset. So no matter who you are, security or the lack thereof does affect you. And as we'll see, negligence in caring about your own security or negligence in taking action to improve your own security will ultimately impact others as well. And last thought on that, even if you don't care, there are actually reasons you should. I hear all the time people kind of say, I don't really care that much about security. I'm not sure why it's such a big deal. Well, we'll talk a little bit about why it should be a big deal to everyone. So security is really everyone's problem. Whether we realize it or not, every person at a company, every person in a household, every individual's actions and inactions have an effect on everyone else around them. So here's the thing. A typical user will say, why would anybody want to hack me? I'm not that interesting. This is something that probably every day thousands of people are telling some person who's interested in security or interested in IT. They're saying, it doesn't apply to me. Like, why should I even care about this? I don't have 1 million followers on Twitter or Instagram or whatever. I'm a boring everyday person. Nobody's going to target me. Well, the thing is that it doesn't actually matter how interesting you are. No matter whether you have 1 million followers or 10 friends, your accounts are still valuable to an attacker. And also another point on this, often the attacker is not targeting you specifically. They don't necessarily know or care who you are. So it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter how many followers you have, because they're going to find some interesting things that they can do with the accounts that they breach. So let's talk a little bit about something called credential stuffing. How many of you have heard of credential stuffing? Okay, cool. That's really interesting. It's like exactly like this half of the room, like a diagonal sandwich cut. Okay, so credential stuffing attacks are basically where you've got accounts that have been compromised, right? There's a data breach, a password dump, and so account credentials are out there, okay? They're available to attackers. And they know where to look for these things, by the way. And so what they often will do is they will use scripts, programs that automate the process of trying these usernames and passwords that they found in a dump to log into all sorts of other accounts. So imagine that there's some forum that gets hacked, and they didn't really have good security practices with how they saved passwords and things like that. Maybe they're not hashing or all those other like fancy technical things that a good server administrator should be doing. Maybe they didn't do any of that. And your average person typically reuses passwords on just about every site because it's a pain to remember 1 million different passwords. And many of you probably are users of a password manager, but the average person is not. The average person will just reuse the same password everywhere, or if they have some security-minded friend or family member who really tells them, you can't do that, don't share passwords, don't reuse passwords, then they might have like maybe 2 or 3 passwords that they alternate between. And this is a very common thing. So a credential stuffing attack, the way that this works essentially is that through the use of this script, it's just going to automate the process of trying every combination of email address and username or username and password on a whole bunch of different popular sites. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, banks, PayPal, really any site that you can think of, any forum. And they're going to try to just see what hits they get. And again, this is all automated, so they don't even have to be watching this process as it goes along. And eventually, once this process completes, they've gone through the whole database of email addresses and passwords. Now they've got a file that lists for them, here are all the hits that we got. So this username and password is perfectly valid for Facebook. Oh, okay, cool. So let's talk about a particular example with Facebook. Let's say that your information was in one of these data breaches. Now someone knows how to get into your Facebook account because you reused a password. And let's say you've only got 10 friends. So that's not a big deal to an attacker, right? Why would they even care about getting into a Facebook account where they only have 10 friends? Well, here's why. Imagine that of those 10 friends, you've probably got a couple relatives. You might have a couple of close friends, and you may have a couple of friends that you talk to every once in a while. Maybe they're old high school friends or something like that. But pick any one of those people and send them a message through Facebook Messenger, right? As an attacker, you can, this is just one of many examples, say, hey, friend, relative, I'm stranded overseas, and I am having a really hard time right now because I can't get into my bank accounts. I'm locked out, and I need your help. Is there any way that you can wire me some money? Now, this is something that an attacker would do in order to obviously defraud one of the friends of that Facebook user. So that individual who had lax security, who was using the same password on multiple sites, now it's not just impacting them. It's not just, someone's going to post on my Facebook wall, who cares, right? I don't care if I get locked out of my Facebook account. But now it's having a direct impact on people that you know and love. So that's an example of why this is so important and why people need to think differently about whether or not they're interesting and whether that even matters in the equation. So even if you don't care about your own accounts, you should be aware that an attacker can use your accounts to cause harm to your loved ones. And therefore, and of course when I'm talking to you, I'm talking to everybody as well that you will be sharing this information with. Therefore, you have a responsibility to care about your personal security, at least for the sake of protecting others. Okay, so Sun Tzu is an ancient Chinese military strategist. I've got a couple of quotes from him on here. And this is one of the things that he said, obviously translated into English, but pretend inferiority and encourage your enemy's arrogance. So again, he's talking to warriors. And he tells them, pretend that you're inferior, and then your enemy will kind of become overconfident, right? And so one takeaway from this, for our purposes today, is don't be arrogant. When you're arrogant, you're vulnerable, and you can be caught off guard. And I think probably most of us would agree that Apple users tend to be a little bit arrogant. Maybe not, I don't know, I might just be making that up, but it certainly doesn't help that Apple told people for years that Macs are more secure than Windows PCs. You've seen these ads, the I'm a Mac, hello, I'm a Mac, I'm a PC. The very first one of those ads, Justin Long playing the Mac, is wiping the nose of John Hodgman, the PC character, and he's doing this because poor PC is infected with a PC virus. And Macs don't get PC viruses, so the Mac doesn't have anything to worry about. So he's helping out his buddy. Oh, this is so sweet, right? And Macs don't get PC viruses, so we're totally fine. Okay, well, anyway, this is the kind of messaging that Apple was communicating for many years. But the sad fact is that Macs and Apple mobile devices are arguably not much more secure than Windows and Android devices. A bit safer, perhaps, since there are more malware variants targeting other platforms, but Apple devices are not hacker-proof, and to mistakenly assume so is arrogance, which makes us more vulnerable. Okay, so how to retrain your brain. Another quote from Sun Tzu. He says, "The general who wins the battle makes many calculations before the battle is fought. The general who loses makes but few calculations beforehand." Okay, so this is obviously talking about preparation. But one takeaway from this quote is that we must prepare ourselves by trying to imagine the ways in which we might be attacked and how we would defend ourselves in those particular situations. So the best way to imagine ways that we could be attacked is to put ourselves in our adversary's shoes. And so I'm going to use that term adversary a lot. Basically, that just means the bad guys, whoever they might be. Whether it's nation-state attackers, whether it's some guy who doesn't like you because you made fun of him on a forum or something. Whoever it is that's attacking you, that's the adversary that we're going to be talking about, the bad guy. So we need to train our minds to think the way our adversary or bad guy would think. All right, so social engineering. This is one of many different ways that someone can try to attack you, but I think it's interesting to look at social engineering because this is all about human psychology. This is not a purely technical attack anymore. Now we're talking about hacking your brain. So social engineering is kind of fun, and there's a million different examples of social engineering. We'll just talk about a few. We'll go through them kind of quickly because you're familiar with some of these already, I'm sure. So important-looking emails, everyone knows what a phishing email is, right? Someone is trying to trick you into clicking on a link that doesn't really go where it says that it goes. And going along with that, there's something called CEO fraud. And this is a particular type of phishing scam where somebody pretends to be somebody who's very important, who's in a position of power or authority over you, maybe in your company. It might be a CEO, it might be your direct supervisor, it might be your chief business officer, it could be someone from HR. But they impersonate these people who are someone in a position of authority in your organization. And a lot of times email programs don't really show you the full email address of the sender by default. And so a lot of times, all someone has to do is use the exact name that that other person uses when they send out a message. And this can often be kind of obscured by a lot of email programs, and which makes it much more easy to fall for these types of scams. Private messages, we talked about that with the Facebook example. Online personality quizzes and things like that. Your Star Wars name, your Star Trek name, your My Little Pony name, or whatever it might be. These quizzes often ask for some kind of personal information. Sometimes they might ask, where was your mother born? Or, because this somehow is going to factor into whatever name you're going to be given, or tell you what Disney character you're more like, or whatever it might be. But if you think carefully about some of the questions that they ask, these are a lot of times the same questions that you're going to see in password recovery questions, account recovery questions, and things like that. And so you've got to be really careful about that kind of thing. Of course, it's a big time waster too, so just avoid that kind of stuff. Cold calls, people could call you up and claim anything. They can claim to be from whatever organization. One thing that a lot of people don't know is that anybody can spoof caller ID. So the phone number that you see when you're answering the phone may not actually be the number that someone is calling you from. It may have nothing to do with who they are, and they could just be impersonating somebody. And they could even use a legitimate phone number. So if you try to look up that number of who called you, you might find out, oh, wow, that's actually the FBI or whatever it might be. But caller ID is spoofable, so be very careful about someone calling you. Tailgaters. Okay, and what I'm talking about here is not, what you might do at a sporting event, but building tailgaters are people who try to get into a secure area or get into a building by just following behind somebody else. And they might have a great story. They might say, oh, hey, I just started working here and I haven't gotten my key yet. Or, hey, I work in this department, and I left my access key at home today. Could you help me out? And again, remember, this is a psychological thing, and they're preying on our innate desire to help other people, to be kind, right, and polite. And so if we're not thinking from a security mindset, we might just automatically gravitate to, oh, yeah, sure, no problem, I'll let you in. And also at the risk of seeming like a jerk if we don't do that, right? I mean, that's the kind of thing that we're scared of. But maybe we should think more carefully. What if that person doesn't have a legitimate reason for being there? If you haven't seen them before, that could be a red flag. And maybe they just work in a different department, but you don't know. You don't know. And so if your company has a policy of not letting people in behind you, then you just politely tell that person, I'm sorry, I know I don't mean to seem like a jerk, but it's company policy. And but you can call the front desk, and they can probably help you out. So at the risk of seeming like a jerk, often we will do things to help other people out. Visitors. Some people might come by your business or your home, and they might be dressed in such a way that they look like they're a professional. They might say they're from your internet service provider, and they need to. They're doing some work on the street, and they need to come in and see where your network connection comes in to your network operations center or whatever it might be. This kind of thing can happen, and it may be legitimate, but you don't know. And so it's the kind of thing you need to check out. You need to be aware of, because it could be somebody who's trying to do something that they shouldn't be doing. And a very common question that a social engineer will ask is something of some variation of, can you help me? Again, they're trying to play on our natural desires to want to help other people. So to sum it all up, consider the commonly repeated X-Files motto, trust no one. But obviously, there's really a lot more to developing a security mindset than just not trusting people, right? The best way to retrain your brain is to force yourself to look at everything from a different perspective. In every situation, in every circumstance, consider your surroundings. Then think to yourself, if I were a bad guy, how could I use this to my advantage? So we've got the game that I mentioned that we're going to play. And this game could be titled, What's Wrong with This Picture? Or we could also call it, What Would an Attacker Do? Okay, so this is your turn to practice. So I can tell some of you have probably seen this before, okay? So what's wrong with this? Somebody just shouted out, because everyone knows this one. Yeah, you've got this secure gate right here. This is great, right? So, we spent all this money putting in a gate, but anyone can just jump over the rail. And so unless that door over back there is locked, that's not going to help you really that much. Okay, what about this one? Ah, yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Now, in certain other circumstances, this door may not be so bad, the security gate, but there's a little problem that it's not closed off at the top. And so exactly, this is a ladder. Someone can just walk right in and get past your security gate. Not very secure. And of course, this has been memified, of course, when your security gate is a ladder. Now, this one, there may be some different answers to this, and this one's not super obvious, but this is advertised as a Vandalproof security camera. And what they mean by that is that they're not easily breakable with blunt force. You can't just hit it and have it break. But if you were a bad guy, what else could you do about a security camera? Spray paint, put a garbage can over it. Yeah, just obscure it, right? How about this idea? Silly string. I like this one because it's non-destructive. So, so yeah, silly string. What it costs, a couple bucks for a can of silly string, And you can effectively take out an expensive security system that probably would cost a lot more than $900, but defeating the system, priceless, right? What about these things right here? What do you see? Like, imagine yourself as an attacker, and what do you see here? You see microphones? Okay. Home automation? Okay. Yeah, I heard someone thinking security-minded over here, order things for people. Okay, interesting. So there may not necessarily be a ton of ways right now that you could use this to, say, break into somebody's house or something like that, although a lot of times people do have smart locks and things that are tied in with their home systems. But there's a lot of interesting things to consider here. There's accidental triggering of wake words. You might be compromising your own security and privacy sometimes. Recently in the news, there have been people who work in these centers for companies like Amazon, Google, Apple, who analyze these recordings that they get to take a look at, how they can improve the products. And these are anonymized. That's what the companies will tell you, meaning that they're not associated with your particular account. However, it's not necessarily anonymous if you happen to be speaking personally identifiable information and that gets picked up on the recording, but in any case. So another potential attack that I see here is one called a dolphin attack. How many of you have heard of dolphin attack before? Okay. So dolphin attack is an interesting attack idea where you play audio at such a high pitch that humans can't hear it, but devices can. They can still pick up on this. And there are a lot of devices that really haven't been engineered to tune out those ranges that humans can't hear. And so there may be ways that you could do something like ordering a bunch of stuff for somebody, or putting it into their shopping cart, or you could do some things that are a little bit more nefarious. Like, for example, if it's connected with your lighting system, maybe somebody next door, plays something, right by your window that tells your device, whatever device you might have, to turn off your lights in your house. That might be a little scary if that just happens out of the blue and you don't expect it. So there are some potentially interesting and scary things that could be done if you have a device like this, and if you don't keep it muted. I actually do have a couple of Amazon Echo devices, but both of my devices have a mute button on the top, and I leave it muted whenever I'm not actively using it. Okay, I've got some pictures in here mixed in that are here at this hotel. This is one of them. This is a public computer kiosk. And so what's wrong with this? There could be a keylogger. Okay. Okay. What was the second part? Oh, it's a wired keyboard. Okay. Yeah, that's true. But Macs are safe, right? I mean, they're totally secure. It's an Apple device. Like, how can somebody put a keylogger on this? Well, guess what? There are keyloggers in software for macOS, and there are also hardware keyloggers too. You could actually have a little device that goes in between the keyboard and the computer that logs everything that's typed. A hardware device even can do this. So you don't even necessarily have to have access to install something on the computer. You come along, set something like that up. People come along and log into their email accounts, their bank accounts, or whatever other accounts. And then you come along at the end of the day, you grab your keylogger or the log file if you're using software, and now you've got a whole bunch of people's login information for whatever they happen to log into. Now, I don't see anything wrong with using a public kiosk for things like, just things that don't require logging into an account. So if you just want to check local, movie times, or when your favorite museum opens and closes, that's totally fine to use a public kiosk for that. But think twice my recommendation is don't use them at all for logging into personal accounts. Okay, another one here at this hotel. This is a charging station. You can plug in your whatever device you want. It's got all kinds of connectors on it. How might somebody with a security mindset look at this? Or how might an attacker look at this as an opportunity? Okay, okay. Yep. That's true. Right, there's actually a lot of things that are kind of interesting that somebody could do with something like this. Those are some good examples. Another one is, and that's specific to iOS and iPad OS devices, is something called trust jacking. There were some researchers who a couple of years ago, just sort of by accident, discovered that as they were kind of experimenting with some different things, they found that they were trying to back up a device, an iOS device that was connected to their computer, and they were running some commands and things, and what they discovered was that it had backed up some other device, and they're like, how is that possible? Like, this is the only device plugged into this computer. And it turned out that they were backing up someone else's device wirelessly, someone who had previously charged their iPhone on that computer. Now, the way that this happened is that back in iOS 11 and earlier, I believe, it was something where it would permanently just trust that device. Once you one time said, I trust this device, once you connected a device to a computer, it would permanently trust it. And there was only one way that you could untrust a computer that you had previously connected to, and that was to nuke all your network settings and start from scratch. And by the way, that part of it still hasn't changed. There's still no way to see on your iPhone what computers you've trusted and specifically just untrust certain computers. So this has gotten a little bit better, that particular trust jacking scenario. But just one thing to keep in mind is when you're charging your device, if you're charging it in a kiosk like this, if you choose to plug into something like this, just make sure that you don't see a prompt asking you to trust something, because that means you're connected to a computer. Okay, it might not look like a computer, but you're connecting to a computer. And so you need to make sure, if you do see that, I would just unplug. But if you do see that and you really, really need to charge right there and then hit no. Make sure you don't trust that device because it's a computer and it's trying to get data off of your device. Okay. We saw this last night at the Aquarium of the Pacific. If you were on the tour, you might have seen this QR code. Now, there's nothing wrong with this particular scenario, but what I wanted to bring up is that we have a tendency to become desensitized to things we see a lot. And so now this is a QR code that's actually painted on a mural. So this would be pretty hard for someone to come along and maliciously modify, right? Well, yeah, you could put a big giant sticker. This is like this big on the wall. But yeah, sure, you could print out a big sticker, and it might be a little obvious to the aquarium staff when they walk by. They might notice that. But yeah, a lot of times when you see QR codes in public, they're just little codes that are just stuck somewhere, and it's really super easy to put a sticker over the top of it and redirect people to some other place. As a matter of fact, there's a scam that's been common in China and other places where there's pay with Bitcoin, stands, and a lot of times people will put up fake stands, so they're actually giving Bitcoin to someone else, not the restaurant. So this is a real thing that's actually being used. And I also saw something similar to that when I went to Paris. I was at a bus stop, of all places, and in this particular case, it turned out it was okay. I scanned the QR code with an app that would tell me where it would go without actually going there. And I found out that this actually was this transit authority that had apparently placed a sticker over the top on the outside of a pane of glass, instead of opening it up and putting the sticker on the inside where it might be more trustworthy, they put it on the outside, so it totally looked like someone was trying to be, exploitative. But beware, as of stickers. And honestly, I mean, unless you really need to, I would kind of avoid scanning QR codes that you find in public places. All right, and also I've done some fun little stuff. I've got a video that you can find. I'll have a link to it in the slide deck. Or, of course, you can just scan this QR code to watch that video, if you trust me. I'm glad I got some laughs out of that. Okay. This was seen this morning here at MacTech Conference. Somebody in Avery Chipka's session, which, by the way, was about security, and by the way, specifically mentioned not leaving a device unlocked for other people to just walk by and do whatever they want with. Somebody left an iPad there. Now, if you're this person, nothing against you. I mean, probably just about everybody has done this at some point in their life, walked away. But be careful about that, because you never know who you can trust, right? You might have somebody like this lady right here who comes along and leaves a little note for you. Now, she was being very kind by just leaving a polite note instead of, trying to see what else she could get into or check out that person's pictures or other things like that. So just something to think about. Make sure you lock your workstations, including your iOS or iPadOS devices, before you walk away from them. What about this? What if you see a flash drive on the ground? It's like a 128 gig flash drive. Yes, free flash drive, right? Okay, so what are the potential problems with that? How might an attacker use something like this? It could act like a keyboard. Yeah. Thomas actually was telling me earlier that he has a little device that can do this. It looks pretty much just like a flash drive. It's a little thing that you can plug in, and it behaves like a keyboard. Now, there's a particular type of attack called bad USB, where somebody can maliciously modify the firmware on a flash drive. They can buy a flash drive, modify the firmware to make it behave as both a flash drive and a keyboard. So you might think you're just plugging in a flash drive, but you might also be plugging in a way for someone to exploit your computer, to get it infected or any number of other things. So beware. Also, has anybody ever heard of USB killers? They also look like a flash drive. And if you plug them into your laptop or your PC or Mac, they're going to fry some electronics in your device. So yeah, I would not recommend plugging in something that you find lying around. Now, in the front row, somebody mentioned this earlier. If someone lends you a cable, just like that charging kiosk example, cables, believe it or not, can have tiny computers in them. Even a little lightning cable that looks exactly like Apple's cable can have a tiny computer in it that has a Wi-Fi transmitter that allows, so if you plug that end into your computer, someone can do exactly the thing we were just talking about. It's that same bad USB concept where it perfectly works like a charging and data synchronization cable, but it also has a keyboard. And so it can run through a series of commands and potentially infect your device or exfiltrate data or whatever they want to do. And in fact, some of these cables have actually been on sale. This is called the OMG Cable. All right, and just in case you think this only has to do with lightning cables, or if you're thinking, yeah, but I don't really plug one of those lightning cables into my computer to charge it. I only plug it into the wall outlet or something. Okay, but USB-C cables can and have also been modified in the same way. In fact, the same guy who made the OMG cable created this USB-C cable as a proof of concept. To my knowledge, they haven't been sold, but you know, it's possible. It's been done, and so that means other people can do it too. And you have to charge your laptop. Okay, so I'm going to toggle between two screens here. What does this look like? This is an ATM, right? What do you see different between these two ATMs? Yeah, there's a little device called a skimmer right here, right where you put your card in. And what a skimmer does is it grabs your card number, and then often along with these attacks there will be like a camera nearby, so they're watching you as you put in your PIN. And these skimmer attacks can be very effective. They can be found not just on ATMs, but also at gas pumps and many other public places. Really, any place where you swipe or insert a credit card, there could be a skimmer. So what do? Like, I mean, I need to put gas in my car, right? So there's a little close-up view there. So you can. What I would recommend is just giving a little tug. If you see some place where you can put in your card, before you put in your card, pull on it and see if it detaches. Okay, because if it's legit, it's not going to just come off that easily. And if it's not, then that's probably a skimmer, and it's better that you go somewhere else to get gas or get money out of your bank. All right. This is a fun little one that I'm currently doing a little bit of research on, but this stuff also applies to software. We've been looking at a lot of kind of like physical, real-world things, but you need to have a security frame of mind when you're looking at software too, even if it comes from the App Store. It's been approved by Apple, so that means it's totally safe, right? Not necessarily. This is a package tracking app that is made by a company in Germany. And this app's been in the App Store for many years. And before Apple started mandating that you have a privacy policy with your apps, I actually emailed this company and said, hey, I noticed, by the way, I love your app, and I noticed that whenever I switch to your app, if I happen to have a tracking number on my clipboard at the time, your app immediately knows it and knows what shipping company, and by the way, this is an international app. It's got like 1,000 shipping companies I've never heard of. But somehow it knows immediately which of these million shipping companies my tracking number belongs to. I said, are the contents of my clipboard going to your server? Never got a response. And now that Apple mandates this having a privacy policy, I looked at their privacy policy. It says absolutely nothing about data being transmitted to them. But obviously some data is being transmitted because they're looking up where your package is. So I haven't done this yet, but this is one of many apps that I want to take a little bit of time and investigate further and see what they're really doing behind the scenes. It's perfectly possible that they're using some sort of algorithm within the app to determine what carrier your package is being shipped with, but maybe not. And so think about things like this. Even if it's an app from the App Store, that doesn't mean that there's nothing potentially worrisome about it. Okay, so how to train others. By the way, the time's totally off. I think I've got, how much time? 5 minutes? Okay, cool. That's about where I should be. So how to train others. Now that you know these things, now that you're starting like a security-minded individual or think like an attacker to know how they might attack you, here's some considerations for training other people. Share the knowledge. Okay. So, and a lot of these are kind of written with the assumption that you're taking this back to a place of employment. But again, a lot of this stuff really could be applied to any environment. You could even take principles you've learned here and some of the resources we'll talk about And you can apply them to your home, train your kids, train, family members, whatever. But assuming you're in a business environment, one thought is, convince the top level bosses in that organization that this stuff is important, that people need to think about this stuff. And why is that? Well, if you think about it, how do all these breaches happen? Again, we don't always know all the details about how these things initially begin. But a lot of times it happens because somebody clicked on a link that maybe others would have easily identified as probably not something you should click on. Maybe it looks a little suspicious, but to other people it looks perfectly legitimate. And so everybody in an organization needs to be starting to, if they're not already thinking this way, they need to start to train their brains to think with a more secure mindset. And so if you can talk to upper management and explain to them that this is really important, our organization could be compromised. We could be the next headline. This is a big deal. I don't think there are probably too many bosses who would just say, yeah, I don't really care. I know there are some of those bosses out there who will just say, yeah, whatever, it's not, they're going to say the same line as a lot of individuals and say, yeah, but it's not going to happen to us. We're not that interesting. But try to convince upper management, because if you can get their buy-in, then there's a trickle-down effect, and that could really be beneficial to you. Use multiple training techniques. Just some examples. Maybe have a mandatory yearly meeting where you train your whole organization. And this is regardless of whether you're in an IT department, whether you're a consultant. And again, even if at home, like you want to train your family members how to do this kind of stuff, have a yearly training meeting, right? And also when new employees come on board, or you have a new kid, who's starting to use computers, have an onboarding training, right? Teach them as early as you can. Don't wait until the next mandatory yearly meeting to train people. Fish them before they really get fished. There are a ton of organizations out there that do this. This is their whole job, their whole thing is training people how to avoid phishing scams. And so lots of companies do that. There are posters that you can print out and post. You can put them, wherever people are going to see them. I would suggest that you just rotate them around, swap them out, because people have a tendency to kind of have blinders on. When you see the same thing over and over again, it just you don't really notice it anymore. So if you're going to put up posters with good information and tips and things, make sure you rotate them on a regular basis. Maybe when your boss sends out memos, ask them if they might mention some security initiatives in your organization. A lot of times if something's coming from an IT department, people are going to go, yeah, whatever. IT's trying to harass me again. But if it's coming from the big boss, it might be a little more meaningful, and people might be more likely to actually read the message. Also, if you are in the kind of organization that has regularly scheduled meetings, I know people hate being in meetings any longer than they need to, but just see if you can get a 1-minute agenda item in every meeting, and just reserve that time and prepare something that you can say in 60 seconds to remind people about some important security-minded, security-thinking principle. Okay, more considerations for training others. Repetition is a key to learning, so consider the frequency. Reward successful training efforts. If your organization did so much better this year than they did last year, have a party. Even spend some money on it, because this is cool. This is something you should celebrate. And, think about yeah, okay, sure, there's going to have to be some budget for this party or whatever. But think about it from this perspective. If you get breached, this is going to cost your organization so much more. In some cases, if you get breached, your organization will not exist anymore, because it can so badly erode trust in your brand. So when you have successful trainings, thank people, reward them, show them that they're doing great, they're on the right track. Also, keep in mind a security mindset can take time to develop. Don't expect everyone to just get this right away. Just because you do doesn't mean other people will. Not everyone is as savvy as you, as tech savvy, is well versed in these sort of things. So manage your expectations accordingly, and never shame anyone. Don't ever, tell somebody, oh, gosh, like I can't believe you're still falling for the same fake phishing emails. Some people are going to have a harder time. So just be patient with them and keep training until they get it. There's lots of great resources in the slide deck. When you get this, Duo Security has some free security awareness and education tools and activities. PagerDuty, not technically really a security company, but they've got a really cool security training, like a whole outline, a whole like series of like a slide deck that you can present to your organization. You can take it, adapt it, and use it for your organization or your family or whatever. A lot of great information there. A few other resources there. There's some videos. These are all pretty short. Hacking the Grid is a really interesting short documentary about how some red teamers, some penetration testers, people who break into an organization as a job, they're getting paid to do this, to sort of find vulnerabilities. They broke into the US power grid. And so this is kind of a fun one to watch. And a couple other resources. There's a great book. How many have heard of Bruce Schneier? Okay, a few people. Bruce Schneier is like one of the like rock stars of the information security world. And he's written a lot of books. This is one good book that can help you kind of think in a more security frame of mind. Also, I work for Intego, which is a Mac antivirus company. We have a blog and an email newsletter, and we also have a weekly podcast. The episode that's going up tomorrow is actually going to be about this topic. And also Security Now, I have no affiliation with them, but Security Now is a great podcast that's also weekly. It's about 2 hours long, so you need to dedicate some time to it. But if you really want to know more and kind of keep up on all this stuff, Security Now is also a great resource for that. So if you remember nothing else from this presentation, I do want you to remember that if you want to improve at security, you need to train yourself to think different. You need to train yourself to think like an attacker. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh.